Workplace violence is our topic, and we want to look at some factors. What we mean by workplace violence, what can we do to prevent or reduce workplace violence. Workplace violence is any violence act that happen within a work environment. For example, you look at in a workplace, two people fight, obviously two staff fight themselves. It's classified as a workplace violence. If robbers come into your bank, come into the bank, people are going to be dealt with in such a situation. So it's also considered as a workplace violence. So anything in general, even when two people quarrel in a workplace, it's also classified as workplace violence. These have raised a lot of concern over the years because statistics have it that over 20 persons are killed annually as a result of a workplace violence, and over 18,000 persons are assaulted annually within the workplace attributed to workplace violence. What are the major types of workplace violence we can classify? One is the criminal intent. Criminal intent means somebody coming into the workplace with the act of committing criminal offense. Criminal offense range from armed robbers attacking a particular place, assassin coming into a workplace to assassinate somebody, or even people somebody who come to steal quietly and at the end of the day interface with the security and could become violent against the security personnel in your workplace. This is what we call criminal intent. Customer violence, a customer or your client violence is another type of workplace violence, where your customer come into the workplace. All of a sudden, the person becomes so violent and starts shouting, screaming before you see it. Some customers go as far as giving a very loud slap on the worker in the workplace. And this have raised a lot of concern. And we as employers need to look into it to reduce this. Workers to workers violence is another type of workplace violence, where somebody, Mr. A in the workplace, either envy the other person as a result of their input or whatever, start raising issues. These issues can be of physical assault or verbal assault or body language violence. And this affects most seriously the entire work environment. Let's take, for example, if the cashier or the accountant have problem with the production manager, this violence stays and expands. You find it that it's difficult for production to continue in the workplace because the man who is in charge of finance might frustrate every effort for the man in charge of production to get funds. And this has become a very serious threat in the workplace. Finally, is personal relationship violence. What do we call personal relationship violence? Imagine in a workplace, for example, a guy is dating a lady in a workplace, and all of a sudden, one of them decides to break the other person's heart. That person becomes devastated. Their relationship affects the workplace and affects the work output. Sometimes you can see a situation where a man leaves the home and comes to the workplace, and the wife, who is not related to the workplace, comes to the office and cause violence with a man for reasons best known to their private relationship. This has in so many ways impacted and affected the workplace output on its own. Who are those most at risk to workplace violence? One, as you know, women. Why are we always at the receiving end? women are usually the first persons affected, mostly affected by workplace violence. Because they are the weak sex, each time any violence relates in the workplace, women are usually related to it. They usually jealous, yes. Sometimes they get angry, annoyed very easily. So when the male folk have a problem with the female folk in the workplace, the next thing you see is physical assault, verbal assault, and the women become depressed in such situations. So they are mostly at risk, and we need to protect them. The next class of persons that are most at risk on workplace violence are the drivers, and mostly the taxi driver. You can imagine the amount of insults the keke rider gets every day when he goes out for work. So also the driver in the office get insulted for every mistake. Even when the boss is angry for something else, the driver make mistake, the manager gets into the vehicle and see one little sand, it bursts on the driver. So the drivers are also mostly affected by workplace violence, and we need to check on them. Healthcare workers are the next set of people who are most at risk with workplace violence. You know, when you go to the hospital and they are doing their medical procedure, people tend to dislike them. It is a procedure that they need to follow. They don't just jump into conclusion in medicine because this is life and death. But somebody who doesn't know what they're doing tend to bash on them in a recent. In the time of emergency, in the time of curfew, healthcare workers are usually violated by security agents and other weapon bearers. So we need to check on them. And the final set of people that are usually faced with workplace violence are the social workers, most especially the media reporters. Have you understood that each time reporters go out there, they usually psychologically depress them? A reporter wants to talk to you, just want to get the facts from you, and become violent against that reporter. A cameraman is taking his position, and you see somebody just say, "Will you get out from there with your camera?" That man is a father to somebody. So we should watch out while we deal with our social workers in a recent. How do we prevent workplace violence? We are usually talk to employers in this case. You hold the responsibility of preventing a workplace violence. One, analyze your workplace. What are the common things that could lead to workplace violence? If possible, integrate people from their offices. When you put too much people in one office, put too much staff in one office, it leads to workplace violence. Because from discussion, somebody gets pissed off and the whole place becomes rowdy and somebody gets insulted. Violence starts. So you analyze your workplace. Do you have an adequate security that will check who comes into the workplace? Even if the security sees my wife coming into the workplace looking so unkempt, for example, he has the responsibility to hold her back to ensure that she doesn't carry her anger into the workplace that will create a lot of problems. As an employer, you need to create a supportive system, environment for your staff. The reason why people get violent in the workplace is because they are depressed. Sometimes they work around the clock, no appreciation, no support, no time for relaxing. And this builds up anger in them, and any little thing spur up violence, and this could destroy your workplace. Do you have a workplace no violence policy? We call it a no violence policy. It's a policy that you put in a workplace that everybody signs. If you fight in this place, if we hear you quarrel in this place, then you are out. The door is open to you. Do we have effective workplace no violence policy? If you have that policy, you're already saving yourself you're already saving your workplace from workplace violence. Do you have an implementation policy when you put a policy in place, you need to have an implementation policy for it. Let's say you say there's zero tolerance to workplace violence, and somebody violates that. What do you do? How do you implement or enforce that policy? You need to have an enforcement policy to ensure that workplace violence is avoided. Finally, you need to do constant training for your staff against workplace violence. If the people don't have good training on psychosocial support, ethics, safety, and security, then be sure that you're going to continue to manage workplace violence. Managing workplace violence is more expensive than preventing workplace violence. So I usually encourage all employers and managers to ensure that you put these steps. You analyze those things that will give a window for a workplace violence. You ensure that you have a non-supportive system to prevent or aggravation of workplace violence. You need to ensure that you have the right no violence policy that will be implemented in your workplace, and you need to continually train your personnel to stay away from workplace violence. Before I go, you need to take this word. Making your workplace free from workplace violence increase the safety of the work environment and also increase your output. If you don't invest on preventing workplace violence, you will end up losing your entire capital to workplace violence. I remain your guide, Paul Orukamayan, on safety.